super excited because I get to wrap up our series on God of Miracles. And I was talking with a couple of you guys this morning. Man, what an easy message to speak. A miracle of Jesus. You can't really go wrong, right? Because it's all good news. It's all positive things. So I'm excited just to talk a little bit about another miracle of Jesus this morning. And the miracle that I really wanted to talk about was when Jesus feeds the 5,000. I just love the story that is accounted for in the Gospels of that miracle. I just think it's so cool because, and I love what God put on John's heart to share this morning during worship, because it is so spot on. Like, no matter where we are at in that mountaintop valley pendulum, like, we are still able to connect to Jesus. That's all what Pastor Bruce spoke about last week, right? The woman showed up and trusted. That's all we have to do is just show up in trust. So today we're going to talk a little bit about just this concept of Jesus feeding 5,000 people. You guys know me. I have to have props with me on stage or it just feels wrong. So consider your guys blessed. You can't necessarily see, but I have some nasty sardines up here. They smell a little bit, so sorry if you can smell that, and some bread. But I love the concept that out of something so little, Jesus did something so big that day. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to read just the account of the story from the perspective of John, found in John chapter 6, starting in verse 1. It says, "Sometimes after this, Jesus crossed the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up to the mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, and he said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?' And he asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 'It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each person to have just a bite.' Another one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. 'Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far can that go to feed so many?' Then Jesus said, 'Have the people sit down,' and there was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took loaves, gave thanks, and distributed those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. When they all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, 'Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted.' So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with pieces of the barley loaves left over from those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, 'Surely this is a prophet who has come into the world.'" Here's what I love about this specific miracle. It is a little fun fact. I was sharing this with Anne-Marie this morning. Other than the resurrection, this is the only miracle that's accounted for in all 4 Gospels. That tells me it's pretty important, right? Like everything in the Bible, of course, is important, but this is the only miracle besides the resurrection accounted for in all of the Gospels. And the thing I love about this account, the reason I chose the account of John, is because I love how John included the little boy with his lunch. I think there's something so special about that, and I think that boy is representative of us. So that's why I chose that account this morning. One thing to help us understand how big of a miracle really happened here, let's look at verse 7, where Philip said it would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each to have a bite. In that moment, Philip's reply stresses the hopelessness of the situation. It focuses on that hopelessness and judges from the small amount of resources that he assumes they have. He figured 200 denarii worth of bread would suffice for this crowd to have maybe a little taste. And he does not point to the solution, but to the impossibility. And my question is, how many of us have done that before? I have. If I'm honest, I have. There's been plenty of times where there's something going on in life, and this is why I loved what God put on John's heart this morning. There are times, you guys, where we're in that valley and it feels impossible, and that's what we focus on, versus focusing on Jesus being the answer. It's so easy for us to kind of get in that spot. And here's Philip, a man who has traveled with Jesus, has seen all these miracles firsthand. And if even Philip can kind of sometimes go to that place where you focus on the impossibility, how much more likely am I able to do that? Pretty easily if I'm not careful. Looking on to verse 8, we see Andrew is equally unsure about how it's possible. He found the little boy. He said, here's this boy. He has 5 little loaves and 2 stinky little fish. But man, there's a lot of people here. How is this possible? How can we do this? But Jesus had a plan, right? The whole time, Jesus had a plan. So this morning, what I want us to do is just look at 4 different components of this story that I think can impact us. Hopefully, my prayer is encourage us and empower us to go forward and just help continue to be a part of that story of the Great Commission. And the first point today is Jesus shows compassion. That's the very first thing that Jesus did that day, is he showed compassion. He performed this miracle on the heels of facing great grief. He was looking to seek out solitude, rest physically and spiritually, because he had just lost his friend John the Baptist. So he was in a season of mourning. How many of you guys have been in a season of mourning before? What do you want to do in those times? We want to rest, right? We want to take a break. We want to sit back and just have a little chance to rest. So here's Jesus on his way to rest. And what does he find? A giant crowd of people who have come because they've heard of the miracles that he's performed, or they've seen the miracles that he's performed, and they wanted to be near him. And what I love about this story is what we see that Jesus does not get mad. He does not get irritated. He does not seem annoyed that there is this crowd, but instead he denied the rest that he was after and chose to show compassion instead. Regardless of what he felt like he needed in that moment, he chose to show compassion instead. And I don't know about you guys, but I have learned in life, when people are in need, it doesn't necessarily happen when it's convenient for us. Or when we're in need, it's not necessarily the time that's convenient for other people, but it's not about convenience, it's about compassion. It always comes back to compassion. And Jesus, he just had such a great example for us that day, where he broke the pattern of adjusting to what he wanted, and instead he sought to show compassion to these people. One book I was reading just about this miracle talked about how it was like kind of the snowball effect, which I laugh because we, of course, understand snow more than anybody, right? So he talked about how this crowd was like the snowball effect. So I went to picturing a little kid starting with a little snowball, building the base of a giant snowman. So in my neighborhood, snowmen are like the thing in the winter. There's a lot of little kids in my neighborhood. And I walk my dogs, and so I'd see all these snowmen, and there were some just monstrous snowmen in our neighborhood this year. And so I pictured, again, one of those snowmen. It started with this little snowball, and that's what it was like that day with people. It started with a few, and then it just continued to build into this giant crowd of people that Jesus chose to show compassion towards, versus, again, just choosing to seek out his rest. So I started to think about, when in my life have I experienced times where I need that spiritual rest, right? We can all relate to that, needing rest, needing time to restore, needing time to step back. And this might come as a surprise to you guys, but going to camp with your students is exhausting. As much as I love camp, it is my favorite time of the year, but there is something about that week of camp. And my theory has always been, I've always told leaders that come with us to camp, if you don't come home tired, you did it wrong, right? Because our goal is to put it all on the line for those kids that week, to give up sleep, give up whatever it is, and just be with students. That's what it's about. But there's also this sweet moment at about 3:45 on Friday afternoon, when all the students have been picked up and you get to go home. My Friday tradition after camp, I order pizza and I fall asleep to TV shows. That's what I do. Every Friday, the Friday after camp, like the last day camp, that is what I do. But there was this year, and it just happened to be a year where we just had a lot of extracurricular activities that kept us up at night, helping students, tucking them into bed, saying, we're going to sleep, we're going to do the things we need to do. And it wasn't students here, parents just didn't know this. It was several years ago. But it was just a week where there was less sleep than normal, which is fine. It happens. But again, I was at that moment where I was so excited. And all of a sudden I'm like, man, it's 4:30. Where is this kid's dad? Like, it just wasn't here yet. And the kid was like, this is sweet. I don't have to go home. I said, no, I want you to go home so I can go home. And I felt myself, like I still was kind and compassionate to the student, but inside I was like, okay, parent, where in the world are you? And then time continued to go on. You guys, we were at church until almost 7 o'clock that night. And it was a weird situation. The parents' phone wasn't working. They had an emergency. This kiddo was, of course, by this point, freaked out. But man, I wish I could have been a little bit more like Jesus in that moment, because I was so frustrated when that parent finally showed up. I'm like, where have you been? I love you, but come on, where have you been? Versus like, man, what happened? Like I missed a moment there because I was more concerned about my desire to go home and eat pizza and sleep than figuring out like, this is so not like this family, like what's going on? So that's what I love about this moment, because I can imagine that Jesus' fatigue that day was probably way more intense than mine, right? And he still chose to show compassion. He chose for compassion to be what his solitude turned into. And here's the deal. In that moment, do you think all those people showed concern for Jesus being tired? No. They weren't thinking about that. But he still chose to show the fullest consideration for them, which is pretty cool. In Psalm 34:18, it says, he is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Jesus is always, there's not a story in the Bible that says anything or points to anything other than Jesus leading with compassion. It never is Jesus questioned that parent and said, where were you? Right? Jesus always led with compassion. Point number 2 today is Jesus is bigger than anything we face. Anything. And I loved it. Yesterday I had the privilege of judging a short sermon category at Fine Arts at North Central. So I got to hear tons of people do children's lessons and short sermons. And one of the girls was talking about how God can move the mountains with the faith of a mustard seed. And I was thinking about this morning what I was going to be sharing, even as that young, I want to say she was a 6th grader that was getting up and sharing this message. And she was just like, you know what, you guys? No matter what you face, no matter how big it is, God is bigger. And man, is that ever true? God is bigger than anything we face. So another fun fact about being a youth pastor. Camp, I'm old. Camp makes me tired. The second thing is I spend a lot of time feeding teenagers, right? Right, students? We spend a lot of time eating in youth group. And here's the thing. I know all the parents know this. Teenagers eat a lot. So sometimes you're trying to figure out, like, man, how many snacks do we need for students that are going to be up all night running around the church at an all-nighter? I don't know, a grocery store? Like, we need a lot of food for that, right? Like, so you just never know. So I find myself, I have a friend, her name is Beth. She's like the master at figuring out how much food you need to feed big crowds of people. So I'm always calling her, okay, Beth, this many teenagers, what do I need? She had 4 kids, so she gets it. So I'm always trying to figure out, how do you feed large amounts of people? That's definitely something they were facing that day, right? Trying to figure out, how are we going to feed a ton of people? How many think those disciples were incredibly overwhelmed when they looked at this and then looked out at the crowd? Right? Like, how in the world? Like, this wouldn't even feed the Hexam family, right? Like, how are you going to feed? I'm just guessing. You guys have a lot of kids, right? So how is this going to feed 5,000? It felt so impossible in that moment, I'm sure. And I'm sure when Jesus said to them, just give them something to eat, they probably looked at Jesus like he had 10 heads and was thinking, what in the world are you talking about? Like, there's no way we can do this. Because they weren't able to take their eyes off the pressing problem and focus on the answer. And here is what the answer is every time: Jesus. So sometimes we are facing this giant mountain, and all we can do is look at that mountain and say, there is no way, it is impossible. Or maybe we're down in that valley that John was talking about, and we're looking up and saying, there is no way we can get ourselves out of this place. But it's because we're looking at the wrong thing. We need to look at Jesus instead. Because what happens in this story, in a moment, in a prayer, Jesus changed everything. They didn't have to come up with a solution. They just had to be obedient to what Jesus was saying, which was, just give him something to eat. And all he had to do was just say a prayer, and it was done. And I know there are times where we are in valleys, maybe for a long time, so it can be hard to keep our perspective on the answer. But like the woman that Pastor Bruce preached about last week, man, if we can just show up and continue to trust, if we can just show up and continue to look at the right thing, not look at the problem, but look at the answer, look at the solution, which is Jesus, that is what's going to get us through. In 1 John 4:4, it says, greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. To me, that means Jesus is greater than anything I will ever face. Anything. And I don't know about you guys, I've faced some hard stuff. And if I look back, I actually spent some time the past few weeks reading through old prayer journals, and I just sat there weeping at all the ways God has shown up time and time again. And there are ways that I've forgotten even. So I always, even talking with students, I'm like, man, keep a journal of those moments, because that's how you can help keep your eye on the answer when you're in the valley, is go back to how God has shown up time and time again in your life and know that he's going to do it again. He's going to show up again because he always has. The third point this morning is Jesus asks us to bring all that we have. That day, it was a few loaves of bread and 2 fish. Jesus didn't ask the little boy, hey, go find some more. Go tell your mom you need a little bit more. You have some friends to feed, right? He just asked the little boy to give what he had. And that's what he asks us to do too. And here's the thing, I was thinking about this so as I was thinking about this little boy, I was thinking about Gavin, I was thinking about you, and I was thinking about the twins, James and Jacob. I was thinking about these young men. What would it be like for them that day to have been the little boy there with a lunch to give? Imagine the stories that little boy had to tell at kickball in the years to come, or when he was shooting marbles with his friends. Right? He probably told that story for his whole life, that he gave his measly little lunch that his mom gave him, and then Jesus took that and fed 5,000 people and there were leftovers. That's a pretty sweet story to be able to tell your friends, right? And here's the reality. It just took him being willing to say, okay, here it is. And here's the deal. He probably didn't even want to eat that lunch anyway, right? He probably didn't want the fish and bread. And he gave it all. And here's the other piece that I want us to catch, is that he gave it all. And not only did God change lives that day because they were fed and full, but how many of you think that little boy's life was forever changed? I think it probably was, because of what he witnessed that day. And again, the disciples must have thought he was crazy, thinking that little boy's lunch could feed all these people. And now that little boy can go and tell all these people, guess what my lunch did today? In Matthew 22:37, it says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and all your mind. And here's the deal. When we love God with everything in us, there's going to be times where he may say, hey, Miranda, buy that person a lunch. Hey, give that person a gas card. Hey, just open up your house and let teenagers come hang out and eat all your food. Sweet, let's do it. Because you never know what that gift or that moment where you say, okay, God, I'll do it, you never know the impacts it is going to have on the people around you. You have no clue. You have no idea. So what is it that God is asking you guys to give out of what you have? Because a lot of times I think we feel it can be easy for us to feel like if I want to see God do big things through my life, I have to come up with really big things to give so that God can do big things. And a lot of times, unfortunately, in the church, we attach that to money. And you guys, it's just not true. It's just not true. God has a story for all of us, out of the things that we have to give and share. And maybe that is, again, opening up your living room for a life group to meet. You guys, I love meeting with my life group. And that the family that hosts that, they simply are opening up their living room to to create a place and a space where people can come and have community. And because of that, there's a group of people that are in it together, right? And they're just opening up their living room. That's pretty cool. Because you know what? Those are the first people I go to if something's going on and I need prayer. It's the first place I go. If there's something fun and exciting, again, first place I go. And they're just opening their home. Or there may be times where God wants you to do something bigger, and that's cool too. Whatever God is saying, hey, I just want you to give this. But know that it doesn't have to be something giant, and it doesn't have to be monetary. Maybe it's just taking time to sit with a friend so they can talk about life. Maybe it's your time. Just know it doesn't have to be monetary. And then my last point this morning is point 4, is that Jesus multiplies what we give. So here's the thing. In that story, it talks about how there are 5,000 plus men. So that doesn't account for women, for children. So they say that there was potentially 10,000, maybe even 15,000 people there that day. You guys, that is a lot of people. That's like the state fair. I don't know. State fair overwhelms me. That's a lot of people that were there that day. And here is the deal. It didn't just say everyone had a little bite, right? They were filled until they were satisfied. So it wasn't just like a token meal. They were full, they were content, and there were a lot of mouths to feed. So to be able to feed, we'll say 15,000 people until they were fully content and to still have 12 baskets left over, that's pretty amazing. And here's what I want us to catch. Again, this little boy gave what he had. He had 5 barley loaves. And the thing you need to know about barley loaves is that was the cheapest form of bread. It was the smallest form of bread. So it wasn't like it was these beautifully giant, like French loaves of bread from the bakery. It was like the throwaway bread that no one really wanted. And it was 2 little fish. It wasn't like giant fillets of salmon. It was 2 little stinky sardine-like fish. Sorry if you like sardines, Pastor Bruce. That were meant to be like a relish that the boy and his dad could spread on their bread that day. So it's not like Jesus took the highest quality food he could find and said, okay, let's make this a sweet meal for everybody. It was like the lowest quality food, yet Jesus was able to take something so little and multiply it to the point that 15,000 people were fed, when you include all the children and all the women. So what does Jesus want to do through our lives? And here's the thing I love about the story. It's multifaceted for me in that, yes, we can read about the awesome thing that Jesus did for those people that day, but here are the takeaways. 2 things. Jesus is going to show up for us. Jesus cares about our practical needs. That's evident in this story. And he's going to show up every time. It may not be in our timing, but he will show up. And then the other piece is maybe he's going to show up for somebody through you. Through you saying, okay, I'll give my lunch so that all of these people can eat. So maybe the miracles, which I think is pretty awesome that God would pick us, broken vessels, to perform miracles in other people's lives through. But here's the deal. We have to be ready and willing and obedient for those things to happen, right? Because that boy could have just hid his lunch that day and said, they're trying to feed all those people. I'm going to go hide with my food and my dad, and we're going to eat. But he didn't do that. He was obedient. And then Jesus did really, really cool things through him that day, through his obedience. In Ephesians 3, it says, He is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine according to His power that is at work within us. And I want you guys to catch something. It does not say through the power that is within our pastors, our elders, our trustees, our leaders. It is that is within us. That is every single person in this room. We can all be a part of this, every single one of us. And I don't know about you guys, but there is something really fun in my neighborhood right now where spring is always fun, right? Like we're getting outside and getting the winter kind of shaken off from us, but even more so this year because of everyone kind of being more shut up this past year. And there are so many kids and so many people out in my neighborhood. And my prayer that I am praying every time I'm walking my dogs or out on a jog, God, help me be like that little boy, because I see a great crowd around me that needs Jesus to show up. So God, what are you asking of me that you can maybe use to help provide a miracle for someone? And again, maybe that's opening your doors. Maybe that's bringing a meal to a neighbor. I don't know what that is, but I know I'm praying every time I'm out, God, show me a way that I can be a light to my neighborhood. I want to be a person that God can use in my neighbors' lives to see change. So that's my prayer for us this morning is, first off, just remembering, man, Jesus is cool, right? He can do really cool things with things that are just okay, not great. But then He can take those things and make them great and do great things with them. So what do you need God to do for you today? What mountain are you facing that today you want to say, God, I'm going to give this up to you. I'm going to trust that you got this, and I'm going to keep my eyes on you, which is the answer. And also, God, what do you maybe want to do through me? What miracles do you want to perform through me? Help me to hear, and then help me to be obedient.